Check the mic and make sure it sound right, boys.
Welcome once again to Hang On Supi. I'm your host, Caleb Supi Spinner. Today, I love milestones. Milestones are big. They're used to show progress of a show. Today, we have our first guest from across the pond, all the way over in England. Welcome, Mr. Harry Kettle.
Hello. I'm very pleased to be here, Caleb. I'm very honoured to be on the show, and I'm honoured to be the first UK representative to appear on Supi.
Thank you. And of course, feel free to call me Supi at any time during the show. It is the nickname. It's why we named the show what I named it. So feel free to use that as well. You and I both, the thing we have in common, even though you live in England, I live in the United States, is we both live in soccer cities. I live in Columbus, the MLS champs, the Columbus Crew, and you live in England, which is the home of Premier League. I mean, you can't find a better soccer place to live. No,
it is. They say that we were the ones who invented football or soccer, and the Brazilians perfected it, as the saying goes. But yeah, it's the home sport. You know, I mean, you've got rugby, you've got cricket, but when you really delve into the heart of English sporting culture, you can't escape football. Obviously we can't experience it right now, but the fans in the stadiums, the chants, everything about it. People call it a religion, as I'm sure is the case for, the gridiron and basketball, but it really is something else over here.
Now, I might make that mistake a couple times during the show where I'll say soccer, I mean football. I'm going to try to get on your level here. I'm going to try to call it football as much as possible, but we'll see where it goes from there. Football is different over here than what it is with you guys. You guys, except your sport involves more of the feet and probably deserves to be called football more.
I've always found that interesting, but I thought, what would be the substitute for that over there? Would it be gridiron? Would that be what you'd go for?
I think you'd call it padball.
Padball.
That's not as cool, but I mean, you're wearing pads, you're playing with it. I don't know. That's off the top of the head. Feel free to come up with another suggestion, somebody else. But yeah, but I digress. Either way, both are close to the sport, and it's definitely a fun sport, whether you call it soccer or football. So I want to get into this because I think the story of you and your career so far is one that I want people to hear, because it brings a whole different side of sports journalism that I'll mention later on, I don't think gets covered as much as it should and in the way that it should. The world of freelance journalism, but like I said, we'll talk to that in a little bit. First, I want to start with you before you became a professional sports journalist. In 2016, you graduated from the University of Worcester, as we talked about in the show. It's not spelled that way. I had to ask your pronunciation. But you graduated with a Bachelor's of Arts in Drama, while also having been involved in the Tennis Society. And then in the later years of your time in college, you started working as the student brand manager for Spotify. So I named 3 different things there that really don't have a direct tie into sports journalism. So how did that degree and those extracurriculars turn into a sports journalism career?
So it's a pretty strange journey, I guess, overall. I mean, when I was younger, when I was at school, I was always obsessed with sport. It was really my passion. It was really what I loved to watch. I used to watch football, soccer with my dad, with my brother all the time. But I had about as much athletic ability as a deer on ice. There was nothing there in terms of what I could do performance-wise. And the only things I really excelled at were English and drama, ironically. I don't know what it was. I just gravitated towards them. So when it came to picking a place to go for college or what to do for college, I really narrowed it down to journalism in some description or drama. And it really came down to, I just want to kind of do something that I know I can push myself with. I know I can get out of my comfort zone with. And so I opted to go for the drama. And over the course of the 3 years that I was at Worcester, it was a really interesting kind of development, because I think you don't really know yourself in the drama sphere until you're put on the spot and you have to improvise, or you get that gut feeling where everything's going wrong and you have to come up with something on your feet. You have to think about what you're doing next. And I felt like I was able to thrive in that area. But then at the same time, I kind of always knew in the back of my mind I wanted to go down the route of writing, right, in some format. I didn't really know what I wanted to be. Aspirations would be, famous actor known around the world, but we know that's a 0.01 percentile of people get the chance to do that. And as time went on, I kind of realized that I just felt like if I was going to go for the drama thing, I really had to give my all to it and be 100% passionate about it. And by the third year, I kind of gravitated towards a few different things. You know, I maintained my love of football, and I've always been a big NFL fan. Watching those on the side, I got involved with the tennis society, like you said, in which I was all I really did was just kind of play a little bit, but mainly kind of interact socially with the guys and the girls on the team. And then, like you mentioned, the Spotify gig with the student brand manager, because I mean, admittedly, at college, I was for the first few years, I was less about the education side of things and more about the experience. You know, really diving into what it's like to go to college, especially in a place like England. And when I had done that role within the student brand manager sphere, there was a little bit more responsibility. There was a little bit more travel involved. So I was, going to London for a few events. I was going around campus to promote Spotify, like you said. And I think that the thing that kind of pointed me towards the sports journalism was I saw I guess we'll come on to it, but I actually saw a opening for a job at Lab Bible. And that was kind of, I think, halfway through my second year. And I think that's where the direction shifted a little bit.
Yeah, and I relate so much to that. I like to say the reasons that I got into broadcast journalism, sportscasting, similar to the writing aspect of things, but it was a happy storm. It was a happy little accident, as Bob Ross would say here in America. Number one, same thing with you. I loved sports, wasn't really good at them. I was a gentle football player, can't have that, and I was a uncoordinated basketball player, can't have that either. I was a 4-year musical student, so I definitely get where you're coming from with the drama aspect. It is think on your feet. Somebody forgets a line, you got to improvise the whole scene after that. And then I love wearing suits. I love wearing the tie, the shirt, the dressing up. It's just, there's something about it, man. I feel like Benedict Cumberbatch and Sherlock, just this suave, awesome looking dude who can conquer the world. But I definitely get where that's coming from. And honestly, I think it speaks volumes to you, who you are, that you can turn three things that have almost zero relation, not only to each other, but zero relation to the field of sports journalism and covering football, that, you can do it so well, and that you've turned it into a career that is as illustrious and as long as yours is, even though, you graduated college in 2016, you've already done so much. Right out of college, you started off the same route. We may be in two different countries, but it seems like right out of college, we both have the same things. You started off with an internship. You were an intern sports writer in the summer of 2016 for 90 Min. That seems to be, looking at your LinkedIn, there's a very distinct shift here, but that seems to be the position that launched you into your sports writing career, especially when it comes to your interest in writing about football. Again, football, we mean soccer if you're an American listener, football if you're UK or in Europe. Tell me a bit about how that position with 90 Min got the ball rolling, pun very much intended, about onto your sports journalism career.
Yeah, so I was coming to the end of the course, a 3-year course, and you always face a crossroads when you're coming out of college. You don't really know what you want to do. Or if you do, you need to have some kind of game plan, or at least you feel like you do. And I saw this opening for an internship when I was looking for jobs. And, when I was looking through the jobs list, there was different things available in the local area that I could have gone for. But when you see sports internship, you just gravitate towards it. If you're a lover of sport and you happen to, have done a bit of writing in the past, then maybe you want to blend those two together. And when I did that, I think it was a 3 or 4 month internship. And to say I learned a lot was an understatement, because I'd never known what it was like to be in a team writing environment before. I'd never known what it was like to pitch articles, to be pitched articles by the people, to receive different levels of criticism. So I'm a big believer that, the grind and the graft of writing and of journalism is real. But I always find that if you go into an unpaid position, especially into an unpaid internship, you're going to find that you will be treated. A lot of the time you'll be treated like it's an unpaid internship. And I felt like I was a lot of the time. I hadn't really cut my teeth yet. I was still very much learning my craft. I had good ideas, but whether or not I was able to execute them was another thing. Like, I go back and look now, I mean, it's been nearly 5 years since I started the internship. And I look at what I did and the writing quality, and I just look at it and think, wow, how was that allowed to be published even back then? So it was really weighing up the kind of pros and cons of it, because part of me thought, my bosses at the time was really strict. I had one boss who I was it was good cop, bad cop. One boss was nice, one boss kind of wasn't. And I thought, is this how it's going to be? Is this going to be the trend? And most importantly, is this feasible financially? So it really did teach me a lot, because I think at that point, after you go through a few months of that, it's not exactly boot camp in the army or anything like that, but that journalism has been dubbed a cutthroat industry. And I found out very much the hard way early on.
Yeah, that nickname is very, very much deserving. I'm still young in my broadcast career. I've been doing this for 3 years in high school, now in college, but I definitely see that already. It is definitely a cutthroat industry. You've got to do all the right things and more to even get a look at some of these places. The internship did not lead to a full-time position with 90 Min. However, you did go right into a role with Here Is the City, or HITC as I'll refer to it later, as a football correspondent. And on your LinkedIn, which I think is amazing, you wrote 80 to 150 articles a month. How did you manage such a large workload only a few months out of college? Like, that seems like a daunting task that I don't think a lot of people would be up to the challenge for.
So I think there are several factors that came along with it. I think I had, like you said, when the internship ended and it became very obvious I wasn't going to get the full-time position, I really did have to make a sustained choice. I had to make a decision about whether or not I wanted to go into a normal job and just find my feet and see what happened, or just apply to as many places as I can and see how it goes. And what happened was, after college, I moved in with my partner, who I'm still with now, and her mum. And I was grateful for the fact that I was able to maybe have a side job where I earned a bit of money. I did this thing called door canvassing, pretty much just door-to-door salesman. But I spent most of my time in this role that you mentioned. And again, it was another boss who was this is what you've got to do. This is what you've got to stick to. And I think for per month, the rate of pay wasn't great. But again, I felt the challenge, and I wanted to do anything I could to live up to that, because I felt like in that early stage of my career, if I didn't, then I wouldn't be looked at twice again. And when it comes to the writing, it was it's something that's always it has been a thing since I was younger. I'm awful at giving myself praise, but one thing I've always been quite good at is writing very, very quickly, like speed typing. So I can't really write very well handwritten, funnily enough. But when I type, I can touch type unbelievably well. And at an early stage of my career, when I was asked how many articles can you do, I said, I don't know, how many words are there are in these articles? And the boss at the time said, maybe at least 300 words per article, maybe 150 sometimes. And I said, well, I'll just give me as many as I can get, and I'll go from there. So he gave me 4 or 5 a day. I did them by lunchtime. He gave me 7 or 8 a day. I did them by about 2 o'clock in the afternoon. And it allowed me to get into a mindset where I felt like if I didn't meet that deadline, then I would have failed myself and I would have failed the company. Maybe not particularly healthy, but at the same time, like I say, if you want to make a name for yourself, I wanted to do it in any way I could. I wanted to be known as the guy who could produce solid work and a lot of work, but that even though the quantity is high, that doesn't necessarily mean the quality drops. I wanted to try and maintain both, and I was happy to be able to do that for that position.
There's a saying that, if I change the words up a little bit, relates to this, is you can't change the world trying to be like it. I would change it to, you can't break out in the industry doing everything that everybody else does. So even if it wasn't, the most intelligent move to do from a social aspect, you did something that nobody else Here Is the City did, and that set you apart, which I think that outweighs the benefits that had outweighed the lost social time that you had. I at least think I would definitely be in your school of thinking with that. Throw yourself at the job to at least break out in the industry, then maybe pull it back a little bit, but at least that's a way to get your foot in the door in a very competitive industry. Your position at Here Is the City was the start of a 4-year period in which you held multiple positions with multiple companies, including, for example, covering MMA fights for Fightful, and writing about football at FIFA. at the end of that period, you began working as a freelancer. And this is what I really want to get into in this show. And I want listeners to take away from is I want them to hear about this experience and understand more about what it is, what it's required to do, and that it's not all that they've heard before. What led you to shift from those consistent positions with the companies to a freelance life?
So I think what happened was over the course of the few years where I was kind of picking up jobs, putting them down, I always knew in the back of my mind that it would probably come to a point where I would not have the work needed to make this a sustainable career, or I would just have to dive into it and hope for the best. But for me, I just thought that the amenities and the luxuries that came with being a freelancer just fully outweighed any of the negatives. Because like you said, and like we spoke about before the show, I think there are a lot of taboo things associated with being a freelancer, especially when it comes to a field like sports journalism. Because you've got, I mean, I get messages on LinkedIn from people all the time, these kids coming out of college themselves, and they're messaging me and they're saying, what's the best way to get your foot in the door? What's the best way to do this and do that? And I just felt as if there was a switch at some point, almost like an epiphany, where I realized that I can do this. Oh, this is actually sustainable. This is feasible. When I started to pick up a bit of momentum with how many people were reading my articles, and it came, round to the point where I'd have to file my taxes every year, and instead of filing as an employed person in a sustained job, you file as over here sole trader, self-employed. So you've got to take that jump. It's either you're in 100% or you're not. And I really did feel like the freelance element of it all helped me to just build confidence in myself, because I'd been through the ringer where I would have a position and be dropped from it quite quickly. And I'm looking at it right now. I've got an app on my Mac, and it's just the Notes app. Or that's all it is. It's just the Notes app. But I would open that up, and every single day I would treat it like a work day. So I'd get up, I'd make sure I get out of bed, I'd go into the office, and I'd make sure it felt like a work day. I'd get dressed in a way that made it feel like a work day. I would start at maybe ridiculous hours, 7:30 in the morning, and maybe I'd work through till 8:30 at night. Or I would have a position where I would work shifts from 9 p.m. to 1 a.m. as a freelance writer. But I did it because I just started to believe in myself a little bit more. I think my partner has played a huge role in that. I think you have to believe in yourself, but having a support system of someone else there who is telling you what you're doing is the right thing, and telling you, social preconventions about what being a freelancer is, they don't have to mean anything to your situation. Your situation can be what you make of it. And for me, I just felt like I had to go for it, because I thought to myself, look, I'm saving so much money from being at home. I don't have to drive everywhere. I can exercise when I want. I can, just be at home, be in my own environment. And that was just, not only was it good for me from a career point, I think it was also good for me from a mental health point of view as well.
Oh yeah, absolutely. That support system is something that is so incredibly important. And that's another thing that I don't think gets looked at as enough is what's success if you don't have somebody to share it with, right? I mean, that's one of the biggest things in the industry. I think not a lot of people think about that as much as they should, but freelance journalism, getting back onto this topic, is something that I personally believe is thought of as a backup option for a lot of people leaving college, with positions at networks and media companies at first priority in the US here. You want to go to Fox, you want to go to ESPN, you want to go to Bleacher Report. Those are some of the sports networks where we are here. There are several benefits, though, of working freelance. One of which is when I look at your LinkedIn, I'm scrolling through the experiences. I'm like, you've got like 16, 17 different companies that you've worked for here. They might not be long, but that's a diversified resume that you have there. What has your experience been writing freelance?
It's been one of the most challenging things I've done. I mean, career-wise, life-wise, it is so challenging, because it is high risk, high reward, and there's no point lying about that. I mean, I've been in this field for about 5 years, and it's not like a normal job where if you have signed a contract for a year or 2 years, then it will cost them to terminate you early, or it might be a really difficult process where you've got a certain probation period. There can be instances where I don't sign a contract, and if a company wants to give me this position, and they say that we're going to have you on for as long as we need you, and then 3 months later they say they don't need you, that's just what it is. There's no one there to break your fall. It's, you've set yourself up for that. But my big thing when I first came into the freelance industry, and this isn't going to be the same for everybody, because I think there are positions in one particular sport and you can just go for that one sport if that's your passion. My thing has always been diversity. Everything I say to people who ask me for advice, everything I say to people when it comes to freelancing is, I have found that the best thing for me is having different things you're passionate about and having different things to write about. So there's been points where, like right now, I'm writing about football for one website. I'm writing about MMA for another website. I've been writing about professional wrestling for another website, and the travel industry, because I found a route into the travel industry and went down that road. It is what you make of it at the end of the day. You can choose to have it as a side job. Like, I've got bosses at some of my jobs. Some of my jobs, I have bosses who have full-time careers, but their side gig is being, a managing editor for one of the websites that I work for. And it's just, I get it, because they want the security. But for me, I think the freedom that comes with being able to jump into it is so fulfilling. And I think there, like you said, there is a process between, embedding yourself slowly and trying it out with a few jobs, and then weighing up the risks and the rewards, and fully going into that, fully committing to being a freelancer. But it's rewarding, it's frustrating, pretty much every day. I mean, I average about 6,000 to 7,000 words a day right now. And I understand that that's not an output that everyone can maintain, but it doesn't matter how much you're writing. It's just, if you care about it, and if you get up in the morning and you find that what you're doing you love, then you just got to go for it.
Yeah, and you called freelance journalism a challenge, and I think that's a perfect word for it. It really is, because it is something that not everybody's cut out for, and maybe that's why it's second fiddle. But it's something that is challenging, but there are words. So what qualities in yourself and then in somebody else do you think it takes to be a successful freelance writer? Obviously, you've got to be able to improvise on the dime, like we talked about with drama. You've got to be able to be willing to take periods where you might not have a job, right? But what other things separate a freelance writer from maybe a network or a company writer?
You have to be willing to get toughened up a little bit. You have to be willing to get the kind of criticism, because you can have meetings with freelance bosses, but most of the time they will email you, they will talk to you on Slack or something like that. It's a lot easier for these people, your bosses, to give you criticism over these platforms than it is to do it face to face, because that's just the natural instinct for people, is to, they can be a bit more confident behind a screen. And you have to be ready for so many obstacles to come your way, because I think honestly, it's taken me up until the last 2 years to the point where I can get a piece of criticism, or maybe even get a rejection from a company, and actually sit there and be, okay, move on. That's happened. Let's go on to the next thing. Mental toughness. It sounds very cliche. Mental toughness is so unbelievably important in this industry. I also think that, as I mentioned before, having the diversity to branch out into different sectors, that's really, really important. And the thing is about the self-belief side of things, you don't always need to believe in yourself straight away, because it takes time to build up that repertoire. It takes time for you to find your rhythm in your writing. But peer reviewing, like they say that it's who you know and not what you know in a lot of different industries and fields. That can be really, really true for freelancing. So when you've got when you start to get to know people, whether it be just through LinkedIn or whether it be through maybe positions where you start off unpaid or you start off in a paid internship, make those connections and if you've got a piece of work that you've just done outside the spectrum of what you're actually doing, just go back and talk to people that you've worked with before and say, what do you think of this? Where could I improve? It's almost as if they're teachers to you. And it's having that is literally almost like having I think if you work for a network or a big company, there can be a tendency to fall into a pattern because you're doing the same schedule often every day. You're doing the same thing every day. In the freelance world, you're rarely doing the same thing every single day. You're always going to be thrown a new loophole. And it's almost having a combination of Beth Harmon from Queen's Gambit and Michael Jordan approach. You have to study your own work. Don't worry about someone who's getting 20,000 views on an article who works for a website that you one day want to write for. Don't worry about messaging people high up in that company asking for a job. Let your work do the talking and just go back over and over and over and figure out what it is you can change. Because even 3 months in this industry for freelancing, 3 months can feel like 3 years because your writing can change so much in that time.
There's a basketball player named Russell Westbrook. I don't know how familiar you are with the NBA, but he does a commercial for Mountain Dew. He did it a couple of years ago where his main thing was don't do they, do you. And I think that's perfectly what it is. Don't focus on the competition. I was a track athlete, and we were taught when we were sprinting, the second you turn around to check where your competition is in relation to you, you slow down to do it.
Yeah.
And that's all about keeping that distance between you. The second you start focusing on, for example, that person who's writing for the website you want to write for, who has 20,000 views an article, the second you do that, you're never going to be satisfied with anything you do, whether you should be or you shouldn't. And that's, I'm glad you touched on that, because that's something, again, I think a lot of people need to hear. I think doesn't get said enough. And so I'm really glad you brought that up. One of the biggest drawbacks people see in freelancing, I believe at least, is the potential for periods of time without work. You talked a little bit about that. What would you say to someone who has this fear to convince them that they should still make the jump into freelancing, assuming they still have the qualities that we talked about earlier and that they feel like it's the right move for them?
I think the allure of freedom is just such a big motivating factor, because I think that you, again, to go for a cheesy line, you miss 100% of the shots that you don't take. You just can't. Yeah, you can't plan. You can't plan too intricately into the future, because you're just going to not realize what's happening in the present. Like for me, I mean, away from sport, I'm a big hypochondriac. Weirdly enough, just with medical things and stuff like that, I always worry, I feel a bit ill today. What could it possibly be? If you just spend your life thinking that way, you're just not going to get anywhere. And even in those times where you may be looking for work, or you may feel like you have to get a side job to, maybe just washing dishes or something like that, it doesn't matter. It's not like you're taking a step backwards. I think a lot of people fear the idea of going into the freelance game and then having to take a step back. And because they feel in their mind they take a step back, but because they've taken the step back or gone into another job not related to their field, they feel like they've failed, but they haven't. Because you can spend every waking minute doing that other job, washing those dishes, but in your mind, you're thinking about, okay, well, I'm going to go home today. I'm going to go on Indeed. I'm going to go on LinkedIn. I'm going to see what freelance positions they've got available. I'm going to see what's out there. I just think that the big thing I found was that you just feel like you want to run away. And I can totally understand that. And it's even worse if you're on a platform like Twitter, which I'm on far too much. But if you're on someone like Twitter and you're seeing people that in the industry or having jobs, or if you see, I've got some personal news, I've just taken on a new role. They've done that because they've found that success, and that's great for them. But that doesn't mean you aren't going to achieve it. So, I mean, Diamond Dallas Page, professional wrestler, didn't get signed by WCW for any wrestling fans out there until he was 35. It doesn't. There's no time scale on this. If you're a freelancer, you could literally have a career for 20 years, and you could think, I've always fancied myself this new role, and you could just go for it. You could save up the money for a few months, and then if you have a month where you don't have any work, you could have money that you've set aside that can tide you over. And then, like I said before, maybe get a job on the side. You know, when someone's got a gun pointed at you, again, another ridiculous trope from this one from Suits. If someone's got a gun pointed at you, there's not one way to respond. There's 146 ways to respond. You know, you turn the gun on them. You get out a bigger gun. I just think that you have to find that edge that makes you, and you have to find that ability to adapt. And it's in everyone. And even if people don't think that it is in everyone.
Harvey Specter, one of the most inspirational fictional people that's ever been on film.
What a man. What a man.
Yeah, no, I get that too. There was another bit, you miss 100% of the shots you don't take. Yeah, the original quote's from Wayne Gretzky, but to quote a show that's big here that actually came from England, The Office. I was gonna say quoted by Wayne Gretzky and then Michael Scott, but didn't want to take anything back from what you just said there, and that is all important. I think at least if I were this guy in the hypothetical who has the fear of going times without work, I would have my fears quelled. I would at least say, just because of everything you said and how true that is. How do you think your time as a freelancer has grown you as a sports writer? We've talked about the evolution of you realizing I don't want necessarily the full-time website job. I want to be a freelancer. How do you think you've grown from where you started to now?
I just think that I've been able to learn every day, and I don't think there are many jobs in the sports writing industry, journalism. I don't think there are many jobs where you can grow or feel like you're growing every day. And I think that does come back to my idea of writing about 3 or 4 different topics, 3 or 4 different subjects, because you could be writing something where it's a top 10 list about 10 best cities in Europe to go to in the month of February. And then you can be writing a breaking news piece about how, you know, I don't know, Man United lost to Chelsea 1-0, and it was a 94th minute winner. And yet both of those scenarios can blend together in very weird different ways. You can use different tropes and phrases from one and pass it over to the other. I mean, the weird thing for me is, and I think the thing that can motivate people is that even if you don't do a course at college, because I think you can, obviously there are so many unbelievable opportunities you get through doing those things at college and university, but the idea that you can be a freelancer can go all the way back. It can go all the way back to when you were in school. It can go back to the idea that you don't need to do that degree. You can find your research and find everything you need online or in books or in different, you know, journals and things like that. My vocabulary has just expanded massively. That's been a big thing for me. And part of that is because I have looked back at my work and thought, okay, well, what word would I use for this sentence differently if I was given the chance to write it again? But I think there's been a growing maturity to it. Like, I used to feel as if I had to write 30 to 35 words in a sentence for it to make sense, for it to sound interesting, for it to sound appealing. When in reality, like, ironically, I've just started a new position where one of the SEO features, search engine optimization, which is crucial for getting your content out there on Google and things like that, you know, they want sentences that are 20 words or less. And I think to myself, you know, 20 words or less, can I do that and make it sound interesting? And I did my first article and I went, oh, I can do that. There's no one writing style that even needs to fit you. You can have your own personality and you can insert that into your pieces. And that's what I try to do, because when I first started, I always wanted to add my own personality. And I always wanted to add my own touch to it. But then I realized, you know, there's nothing wrong with needing to tell the actual core of the story. If it's a news article, it's a news article. People need to know what's actually happening and going on. And I think that it's been humbling to know that you can come outside of your comfort zone and you can write in a different style. It doesn't have to remove the first style. It doesn't have to take away from it. You can have both. You can have neither. You can move on to something else. It's all been about, for me, just developing and honing my craft in so many different ways every single day.
You never realize how important a thesaurus is until you become a writer, right? The different ways to say the same thing that maybe has been said 90 different ways, finding number 91 of how to say it is just so important. And it's funny. I'm so glad you mentioned, soccer. I am a Chelsea fan. Go Blues. My friend Paul Brown in London turned me on to them. But one of the other things I wanted to touch on there was you said it's not essential to put, things in 35 word sentences to make them entertaining. I arguably, maybe we don't share the sentiment, but I arguably think it's more impressive when somebody can turn a 35 word sentence into 10 or 12 and still have the same effect. That's what they did in college. When you apply for universities here in America, you'll write a series of essays. The hardest ones, or the ones that required more efforts, weren't the 750 to 1,000 word essays. They were the 250 words or the 150 words, because then you have to take everything you want to say, everything that fits the prompt, and you got to cut it. You got to trim all the dead wood out of it, make it, as simple and as concise as you can. So once again, you've talked about several different things that I'm so glad you brought up, because I think they tie so well into this conversation and the message that we want to get out, which is freelancing is not the scary monster that should come second-handed to working for a media network or a company or a website. And I'm so glad that you touched on a lot of these things. And I really hope that my audience gets a lot out of this, because they should. And you were a perfect guy to get to say this. I'm glad we connected on LinkedIn. I'm looking forward to staying in touch with you. If I'm ever taking a trip across the pond, once the world rights itself, as my men's glee instructor says, I will give you a ring. Travel wherever I need to make sure we get together sometime. Thanks so much for coming on.
There'll be a beer with your name on it, my friend.
One of the other differences between our countries is your drinking age is a little lower than ours is here.
Yes.
Also, I should say for the Ohio State faithful that is listening to this, and I go to the Ohio State University. We have a rival with that school up north. It's a word that starts with M and ends with Michigan. We don't say the name on campus.
Cool.
I said go Blues, plural. Blues is plural, not the singular. We don't say the singular. I said go Blues. There is an S on the end of that, okay? I could see the controversy waiting to happen. Thought I'd clarify that.
Gonna hit the
Just had to get that out there.
It's gonna hit the papers all over campus. You're gonna be vilified.
Yeah, I'm 7 episodes into this show, and already nobody's gonna listen to me anymore. Make sure you're following Hang On Supi on Instagram at Hang On Supi. Also, make sure you check out our YouTube channel. The podcast releases every Wednesday, and then you can watch the show on Fridays on our YouTube channel. Make sure you subscribe there. Also, if you follow the Instagram page, it is available on IGTV, Instagram TV on Fridays as well. Thank you so much to Mr. Harry Kettle for coming on. I'll see you next Wednesday. But for now, that's the show. I'm out of here.